Great.
Oh, okay, folks. As I said, welcome to today's webinar. I'm just going to hand you over to Deirdre from Intertrade Ireland. Just to remind you that there is a Q&A button in your menu bar. If you could use that to ask any questions as opposed to using the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. So Deirdre, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Orla, for helping us set up the webinar today. We're delighted to be working with the revenue today, who have a really good presentation here for all you in the room, which will hopefully be of benefit to you if you're moving goods through from Northern Ireland through the ports and the airports in Ireland. So I'm not going to keep you for too long. I'm going to pass you over to Caroline O'Keefe, who is a principal officer in the revenue and is the head of the e-customs division. And Caroline will take you through the slide deck just to give you a little bit of information. Don't panic, because the webinar will be recorded, and we also have questions and answers at the end, and anything that isn't covered on the session we'll try and follow up afterwards. And also just a little bit of housekeeping as well. If something should happen and Wi-Fi cuts out, don't worry, we'll try to mitigate all those kind of risks in some shape or form. So thank you very much for joining on very short notice. And Caroline, thank you so much. I'll pass over to you. I'm going to manage the slides, so you shout to me whenever you're ready. Caroline.
Okay, so if you just, can you hear me okay? And if you want to move to the next slide there, so please. So thank you all very much for coming today. And I know we have a mix of attendees that maybe play a different role in the supply chains. So I'm going to try and make the presentation and help you see your place in the supply chain and see what the impact of our new system might be upon you. So what I'm going to work down through the slide deck here is we're going to give you a little bit of a brief introduction to the fact that revenue is introducing our new declaration system for exports. And there's also new steps in the procedure that you'll be required to comply with when we move to that stage. Trying to identify then the stakeholders that are impacted, the types of movements that will be impacted, and then just so that you can more easily kind of identify yourself and the potential impact, we have some example of the flow of goods, and we'll show there the different impacts on the different players in the flow. And then we have a few slides then about roles and responsibilities of the different parties in the supply chain. That's a really good takeaway for you, just to see if you recognize what role you're playing, then you're able to see what the impact and what roles and responsibilities you have. And then really, I suppose our key message is how to avoid delays when moving goods. Our intention with the introduction of this is to keep things moving as smoothly as possible throughout all our ports and airports in Ireland. So it's how do we, all of us involved in this, take steps to ensure that that's what we achieve. So on the next slide there, if we look a bit about AES going live. So as you'll be aware, the whole reason that we have export declarations and is historical why they exist, but the reason that we now come in and close out an entire movement, so it's an end-to-end process from when you submit your declaration right through to us giving back confirmation to HMRC that your goods have exited from Ireland. It's really just for VAT purposes. Now we know that HMRC and the UK don't necessarily use it as proof for VAT. They use your invoices and everything, but that is the logic and the purpose behind the loop that is that export loop. So just if you bear that in mind, I'll turn off my camera. If you bear that in mind when we're walking through this is the reason for it. So AES interacts with a central system in Brussels called the Export Control System. And your movements are described. So any declaration, if you're moving goods currently from Northern Ireland via any Irish ports or airports
We do know the Wi-Fi connection is a bit, let's say, vulnerable today for Caroline. So if you can just bear with us, hopefully they'll reconnect in a moment. The joys of technology.
What we're
Caroline, you timed out there, so we're kind of on the first, the European Export Control System.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problems.
Yeah, so AES will be replaced, AEP will be replaced by AES, and we're going live on the 30th of January 2023. Right, and for the procedural change, what we're talking about now, there's now a two-step process at export. You have to present the goods electronically to us at exit, which is a new step in Ireland, and then we get confirmation of exit of the goods. So that's the procedural change. So if you move to the next slide. So we're trying to identify here, I suppose, the different stakeholders who may be impacted by the changes that we're bringing. So I mentioned already, if you're a business and you export goods from Northern Ireland via any Irish port or airport, so if you are a party in any of that, then you are a stakeholder in this supply chain. So for instance, if you are a manufacturer of goods and you sell, say, to customers in the US, you're the exporter in that scenario. If you're contracted by, say, a customs agent to do your export declaration, or if you use a lot, I know an amount of trade in the UK uses the TSS, but I mean, the TSS then are acting as your declarant on your behalf, right? If you're a shipper or logistics company and you're contracted by the exporter, the declarant, to bring those goods from the premises in Northern Ireland, say to America in that instance, then you're impacted, you're a stakeholder. Or if you're the driver, if you're the haulage company, if you're driving the truck that collects the goods from the exporter and delivers them to customers, for example, like if they're coming down and going by Ro-Ro ferry across to GB, then you're also a stakeholder. So they're just samples and examples of all the different stakeholders. So on the next slide, then you'll see that the kind of movement flows and the supply chains that we've put up, they're not definitive, but we've tried to do it in such a way as if you can see yourself in the supply chain, it might help you understand how you may be impacted by these changes. So let's go with the first example then on the next slide, Deirdre. So that's from Northern Ireland through Dublin Port, and it's by Ro-Ro ferry out of Dublin Port. So that's a very common movement. We know we have high volumes of them coming from Northern Ireland. So in the left-hand side, if you're the manufacturer, we have an example here that there's a bakery maybe making pies or something like that in Northern Ireland, and they're supplying supermarkets in GB. What we're saying here in this particular scenario, we're saying that the bakery company has employed a customs agent just to do their customs declaration. They're happy to, they have a separate company that does their moving their goods for them. So the agent using the data that the bakery has supplied them with, will create the customs declaration, and that will be submitted to HMRC's declaration system. The bakery company then gets back that declaration, and if there was controls or anything to be done in Northern Ireland, that would all be done at that stage, right? But the bakery in this scenario is creating the PBN, which is the pre-boarding notification, which the haulier needs in order to get onto the ferry in Ireland. That's already in place and fully operational. All the traders will be used to that. So the bakery in this instance provides the PBN to Speedy Delivery here, who's the haulage company that's going to move the goods. They come down to Dublin, they do the ferry check-in, and in the background, we in customs are then going to use the data that is in the PBN to fulfill the new two-step procedure that I mentioned already about the Office of Exit and telling us that you're at exit, and the confirmation of exit. So when the driver rocks up to the ferry check-in and they scan the barcode, in the background, we are creating that electronic message into our system to move the declaration on to say, yes, these goods have now been presented at exit. And when the truck boards the ferry and leaves, then we get a declaration from the carrier, and we reuse the data that's within that to fulfill the exit confirmation. And when we get that confirmation of exit from the ferry operator, we then go back and we tell HMRC that the goods have exited. So you can see in that it's a very clean loop of and very much all the happy flow of everything working wonderfully well. So then on the next slide, it's another example of oh, sorry, I'm going to speak a bit about the PBN here. So this is, again, if you're already involved in moving goods through Dublin or Rossdare, you will be familiar already with the requirements of the PBN. So in this, what we're just reiterating for you is that the PBN, and it's the equivalent to the GVMS and the GMR that operates for HMRC. It is an electronic virtual envelope that you put in all the MRNs of the various declarations. You just give us one PBN per truck. But what you really have to make sure, and whoever you are in the supply chain, you need, if you're the haulier or the driver, whatever, you need to make sure that by the time you come to Dublin Port or Rossdare Port to board the ferry, that you have a good check-in status in the PBN. But if any of the declarations are under control in Northern Ireland, then we won't have any details of this. They won't be able to board the ferry here. So you have to complete all of the customs controls that need to be done in Northern Ireland first before you let the goods leave and come down to the port. So once the PBN, I've mentioned it already, if it's checked in by the ferry operator, that's going to fulfill the arrival at exit, that 507 message. So there's no action other than that. So it's really key, whoever is completing the PBN requirement, that is done correctly, and then everything will flow cleanly through the system. So then on the next slide, please, Deirdre. This is just a look then at what the PBN
Again, we'll just bear with Caroline here. Gives us a little bit of time to digest.
Reminder, folks, if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A button on the bottom of your toolbar there, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation.
So just there, Deirdre, for the next slide, if you don't mind, please.
Caroline, we missed this whole slide. Just yeah.
Okay, I'll do it again. So
apologies,
guys. We don't know what is wrong with our internet connection today. It's just not reliable. So on this one, this is just a quick view, Deirdre, for people attending, to show how easy it is to check if the PBN has a good check-in status. It's on the Revenue website. You just go in, you key in, you click on check the PBN status, key in the PBN ID, and you'll see there on the right-hand side that there's a good to proceed to check in there. So it's really obvious and clean that the truck is now good to go down to the port and go for ferry check-in. So if you want, yeah, thank you. So now these are other examples, again, of different kind of movements that are possible and that we have experience of. So this is goods moving from Northern Ireland by road and then by air to the, so they're coming down to Dublin by road and then they're moving by air to the USA. So this is an example of that particular flow. So again, we have a manufacturer, really imaginatively called We Make Toothbrushes, right? So they're based in Northern Ireland, they're manufacturing goods. In this scenario, they are contracting everything out to a parcel operator. They're not getting involved. They just are going to let that guy do most of the heavy lifting as regards the customs obligations. And they provide the declarant, the parcel operator, with all of the details in order for them to do the declaration. That declarant, then the parcel operator engages with HMRC, they get the declaration back. We'll go with the happy flow that everything is green routed and there's no control required. Now it's the parcel operator then that hands on the MRN, so that's the declaration with the reference number on to the truck driver to bring them down to the, so the goods have now left We Make Toothbrushes in Northern Ireland, and the goods are on their way now down to the air handler in Dublin. So in Dublin then, that MRN needs to be provided to the air handler. Our recommendation is that it's handed electronically directly from the parcel operator to the air handler, because then there's no chance of errors in input errors or anything like that. But we know that currently a lot of it is just on pieces of paper. The MRNs are being handed over. So in the airport then, our air handler can either submit the 507 message, which I mentioned already about to confirm presentation of these goods at exit, or Revenue has also an API called ERVS. So that's just a messaging system that they can check that the goods are good to exit the port, and we'll do the 507 message for them. And when those goods, now at that point in time, and this is really critical again, if everything isn't all right at the air handler stage, and if it comes back that we don't recognize the MRN or it's not in a valid status, that air handler is not allowed to move the goods on any further. So it's really critical that the information in the supply chain is accurate, and that's why the MRN is key to all of this. But let's go with the happy flow. If the air handler gets a positive response from us that the goods can exit, they're then moved on to the flight. And once the flight leaves Dublin, the carrier then will send us a message to say, yes, these goods have exited from Dublin, and we will then communicate that message back to HMRC. And again, that's that loop, that export loop is closed out. So that's that example. So again, if you can see yourself as any of those players on that screen, just take it, keep a note of it, and we'll come down to roles and responsibilities in a few minutes. So yeah, Deirdre, the next slide, please. Yeah. So in this one then, what we have is, so we've tried to cover all the modes of transport here. So now we're moving on to a container ship. So what we're saying then is, if goods are moving from Northern Ireland and they're coming by road then down to Dublin Port, and then they're going by container ship, say we have down here, it's going from the Netherlands and onwards to China. So in this instance, we have a company called We Do It All. So essentially what we're saying is they're doing everything. They're integrators. They manage the whole customs declarations and procedures, everything end to end for you. So in this case, then if you're the exporter, your goods have been moved into We Do It All's warehouse. And you still have to supply the declarant with all of the data that they need in order to submit their export declaration. We Do It All then submits the declaration, and everything is grand, and we'll go with happy flow again, that I get my green routing. They then give that, the driver then is free to move those
Just wait for Caroline to come back in again.
your more Again, Deirdre, apologies. Did you
No
lose?
bother. We stopped at the happy flow.
Okay, we're not having such a happy flow here today.
Well, we were on it, so.
So look, I can only apologise again.
But
But
we're getting
okay,
there.
so look, okay, we'll go with the happy flow. So what I'm saying is, it's more likely in this flow that, like, you know, the guys in We Do It All are all looking at the same system. So they're going to be able to know that they're not going to send a truck down with something to check in onto the ferry, onto the ship, I should say, not a ferry, unless it is in the right status. But anyway, when it gets down on the right hand side, then when it's down in the terminal, the Lolo terminal, they will check and make sure that it has a good to check in or to leave status, and they will update us accordingly with the 507 message, or again they can use our API. The goods then will be put on the container ship, and in this instance we will get the 590 message from the shipper, so that We Do It All then will send us the 590 message to confirm exit of those goods. Actually, sorry, that's not the case there. This is an indirect export, so apologies. We will get confirmation when those goods exit the Netherlands, will be when Ireland gets confirmation of these goods having exited from Ireland, and that message will come back in through and into HMRC. So that's that flow, Deirdre. So look, I've mentioned again, I'm not really sure who we have on today, Deirdre, and how much interest will be in. I mean, this is just, if you're the carrier has an obligation, those carriers are going to be in Ireland, and in relation to the ERVS service, so that's how you check that something has a good check-in status for air and Lolo. Again, there really are traders in Ireland that will be impacted by that. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So these are the ones really that we want you to take away about the roles and responsibilities. So you saw in the examples we gave, we had the bakery as a company, and they were taking on a particular role. They were kind of separately going to the declarant and to the haulage company, and they were doing the PBN. So they're the exporter. We have the other companies, we make toothbrushes. At all times there's an exporter involved in this. And what we're saying is, it is critical for you that you ensure that the provision of the accurate and correct information for the export declaration. So whoever you're getting to do your declaration, you must give them correct information. You must ensure before, if you're going to take on the role like the bakery company had, before you give the haulier the goods and the MRN and the PBN, you have to make sure that the declaration is in a release for export status, because otherwise we won't have anything down in Dublin on our system in relation to this particular movement. If something has been called for a control, which is exceptional outbound, but they do get called, all of that control and everything has to be done in Northern Ireland before you move those goods to exit the port in Ireland. You really need to ensure then you provide the MRN of the export declaration to whoever is acting as that trader at exit. So for instance, we saw in our scenario where if goods are moving by air, the air handler in the airport is going to act as trader at exit. So either you as the exporter have to either give it to them, or you have to make sure that somebody else in your supply chain is giving that detail to the trader at exit. And you have to make sure that your goods are presented at exit by whoever is responsible, whoever you've had contract with to carry out these roles. You really need to make sure that they are completing their obligations, because we mentioned already there's two steps. There's presentation at exit, and then there's confirmation of exit. If one of them isn't done, then the second step can't be done, and that could result in delays for you. So on the next slide, then we have the declarant. And here we have our customs agents, we've the guy we do it all, the integrator who's doing absolutely everything. And then in the other scenario, we had the parcel operator. And we know that in Northern Ireland, then the TSS also acts as a declarant for an amount of the export declarations that we receive. So the role of the party acting as the declarant, they need to ensure that they're getting accurate information from the exporter, including like the journey of the goods. They need to know, are the goods going from Northern Ireland to Dublin and out, or are they going directly, say, from Northern Ireland to London and to America or whatever. So that information has to be shared accurately with the declarant. The declarant also needs to make sure that they're lodging their export declaration in a timely manner. So that means in advance of the collection of the goods by the driver, because if controls need to be done, you don't want the driver being delayed, right? You need to ensure that you're putting in the correct offices of export and exit. We've mentioned already about if something is routed orange or red, every party in the supply chain kind of has to make sure that stuff is not being removed down to the port in Dublin if a control is required to be done by Northern Irish Customs on it. And then really critical is that passing on of that MRN to both the haulier, if the goods they are moving by RoRo, and also to the trader at exit, because that's really important that the trader at exit has that MRN in a timely manner. So then on the next slide, we move to the trader at exit. So if you remember, what we said is this is the party who is, I know I keep going on about Dublin Port, but I mean, it'll be Dublin, Rosslare, or our airports where we have a trader at exit. And the obligation of that trader at exit is to, first of all, tell us that the goods are at exit. So they're sending us an electronic message to tell us that the goods are here. And we're saying you have a number of ways of doing that. If it's a RoRo move, again, Deirdre, where did I stop?
We stopped at RoRo movements.
Oh, right, okay.
The RoRo
okay.
movement, yeah.
Great, grand, okay. So, as I said, you can either submit the 507 message, or like if you're going with a RoRo movement, there's absolutely no need to give us a 507. If you just put in the MRN into the PBN, we will do all of that work and that heavy lifting for trade by doing the 507 and the 590. If it's an air or Lolo movement, the trader at exit has the choice either to do the arrival at exit 507, or they can use our ERVS service. But I suppose for people further back up the supply chain and really the exporter, you know, you have to realize that if the goods are in a not released for export status, so say for instance, if you have given us a declaration and you've put like, you didn't put any office in Ireland as an office of exit, then we won't have gotten any of that information. So we'll be looking at that MRN and we'll say, we don't recognise that it's not in a release for export status. And so there's going to be a delay. So, and what we are telling, you'll see it later on for these traders, we're telling this trader at exit that they're not allowed to send such goods on to the carrier for exit. So if they get a response back from us to say it's not released for export, they're not allowed to pass it on to the carrier to let it exit the country. But that trader at exit is also then obliged to kind of resolve the status of the consignment. So then on the next slide, and we're at the party creating the PBN. So now we're back to looking at RoRo movements. So again, we've put in on this slide all of from the examples that we've gone through, the different parties that could end up creating the PBN. In Ireland, you don't need any validation or anything like that. Anyone can go in and create the PBN. It's just on the revenue website, and once you have the MRNs. So what we're saying here, if you're the party creating the PBN, you have to ensure that you receive all of the MRNs for all of the goods that are on the vehicle. You have to make sure that the declarant is providing you with the status of those declarations. And what we mean by that is, like, if you have one that has a physical control is necessary, that won't happen, say, for NI movements, because that will all be done in Northern Ireland. So what you want to hear from the declarant is these all are in the good status, they're released for export. So then you create your PBN, you ensure that all the MRNs are included in the PBN, and then you go in and you do that check, which I showed you earlier about, do you have a good check-in status? So then you give the PBN to the driver with the instructions to proceed to the ferry check-in. Or we also then suggest as well that you should also be advising the driver that they should check the PBN status prior to arriving at the port. So then on the next slide, we're then down to the haulier and the driver. So if you're a RoRo, if your movement is by RoRo, we're advising that the driver, they will check the PBN, that it has a good check-in status before they come near the port. We're advising that they will call to the Customs Office of Export for assistance where the status is not good to proceed to check-in. And then once the matter, if it can be resolved, then they'll get a good to proceed to check-in, and they'll be able to go down and check in the ferry terminal, right? For air and Lolo, what we're saying is that the driver or the haulier really needs to make sure that they're given the MRN and that they have that detail then to pass on to the party that's acting as the trader at exit. And then I think the final roles and responsibilities is the carrier at exit. So here we're talking about the Lolo and air movements, where they are being specifically advised by revenue that under the UCC, they are not allowed to remove any goods that remain under customs supervision. So therefore, if you're the exporter and you've either given it, like, you know, a wrong MRN, you know, an invalid one to the next person in the supply chain, your goods are going to be delayed at this point because the carrier won't be able to remove those goods from customs supervision. After the flight has left, in the happy flow that the goods are on the plane or the ship, they will send us on the details of the MRN and the movement, either via the 590 message or using the ERVS service. On the RoRo side, again, the legal obligation is on the carrier not to remove any goods that remain under customs supervision. So all of the ferry operators, when they're handed over the PBN at check-in, they will do a check to us and they'll ask our service, does this PBN have a good check-in status? And they only allow board responses where it says, yes, they have a good check-in status. Otherwise, the truck won't be allowed aboard the ferry. And then once the ferry departs, the ferry operator will then submit to what we call a NIMS manifest. And inside in that manifest will be all those PBN reference numbers matched to the vehicle reg number. And that allows us then to close out all of those movements. So then on the next slide, I suppose these are just a few key messages that we were kind of hoping that you could take into account and consider. Again, it's all about the accuracy of the information on the export declaration. So making sure that you're putting in the Office of Export in Northern Ireland and an Office of Exit And again, Deirdre, we're timing it here. It's 6 minutes and 50 seconds. We keep going down that. So go on. Where did I stop?
No problem. You stopped on accuracy of information. So the first bullet.
First one. Oh my
Yeah, I
goodness.
know.
Yeah. Okay. Look, it's really just to highlight, guys, the importance of the accuracy of all of the information that you're putting on the declaration. If goods are moving from Northern Ireland via an office in Ireland, that needs to be declared correctly on the declaration. If an intervention is needed by HMRC, then please ensure that's done before the goods depart Northern Ireland, because if they land down here and they're still under control in Northern Ireland, then we can't do anything about that. And it's really about knowing who you need to give that MRN information to in a timely manner, because we don't want to encounter all the rather negative potential delays that we've listed down below. I should just say, in relation to the accuracy of the information and the export declaration, we have already engaged with the TSS, and we're satisfied they know all the changes that we're bringing in, and they are fully aware of the need to ensure that the details on the declaration as regards Office of Export and Exit are correctly declared. So anyone using that service, it should work okay. So on the next slide then. So I mean, this is what our wish list is for a smooth implementation of AES. Really just look back on the slides, identify what party you are in the supply chain, and then just play your part and know your responsibilities. The data quality is critical, right? And sharing of information in a timely manner, and especially that MRN, and clear communications between all of the parties. As I say, it is not our intention to delay in any way exports. We want goods to move freely, but there is much stronger validation now, both within AES and on the two-step procedure of the trader at exit and the confirmation of exit. So we really need accurate information and compliance by the trade. Okay. So I think, is there another slide, or is that the end? Yeah, that's it. So apologies once again.
No problem. Caroline, thank you so much. We're going to open up for questions and answers. I think your presentation was very, very clear. I would hope that anybody on the webinar today will know the importance of the data and the accuracy of getting the right information. You talked about PBNs and MRNs and making sure that the communication and supply chain is good and accurate. And it seems to be all about accuracy, communication. So if you get it right at the beginning, the goods will move. So we're going to open up the floor, if that's okay. I have some questions that have been submitted in advance. So if you just give me a wee second, I'm going to have a look to see what's in the chat here, and then I'll call a few of these questions in as well. And I'm conscious we have probably another 10 or 15 minutes, so we'll try and make these quite quick, and hopefully they'll be of value to everybody on the call. So first question, does the new system impact imports also?
No. We already have, or we've moved to it we've already moved to that, so there's nothing changing there.
Great. Next question. In one of the slides, there is no migration period for indirect exports through NI. Is this correct?
That is the case, because what we're doing from day one is those declarations, when we get them in through the back door of the commission message, we're pushing them straight into our AES system. So, there's no impact on the trader in Northern Ireland. Say from the exporter perspective, the trader at exit and the carrier at exit would be required then to close out those movements in AES.
Okay. That's great. And then the third question then here on the screen, are these examples based on using the TSS for movement? So we kind of sort of touched on that, Caroline.
Yeah, it like the TSS is only well, sorry, my understanding of the TSS role is simply declarant, right? They don't do the PBN, they don't organise anything to do with logistics or anything like that. So I think, you know, my example that I had up there of the bakery company, I think that's the best example. Just replace, I think I had the guy called I'm a customs agent or something like that. Just put TSS in there and that's the flow. That's exactly how it would look if TSS are doing your declaration.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go through a couple of other questions because I think asking these will be very helpful. So one of the questions here is, what happens if the driver proceeds to the ferry check-in in Dublin with an MRN that has not been cleared for export?
The instruction and agreement we have in place with the ferry operators is they are not allowed to board, and they'll be turned around and given a leaflet to tell them what steps they need to take, and that will be to go to the export office in the whichever port he's in. Yeah.
Okay. The next
and look
question.
at what we decided to do. I should just say, if there's anything we can do to resolve the issue, we will do it, right? But like, say if that declaration is under control by HMRC, then we won't have a message on our system. We won't know anything about the movement, and there's nothing we can do. Whereas if the trader simply, the declarant didn't put Ireland down as the office of exit, we can do electronic messages to try and get that declaration and get it back down here. So we can help in some limited circumstances.
Yeah.
But in others, there isn't anything we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one then is kind of where they've done a little bit. So what will happen if the declarant gives an invalid MRN? So the format's incorrect, or an MRN for goods that have already exited to the EU to other members in the supply chain. So then what happens?
Yeah.
And I think it's the internet again. We've only a few more questions, so I'm sure if we hang on in there, Caroline will come back and we'll get through them all.
That if it had already been used up as such, right?
We didn't get the answer to that one, Caroline, so we're really wondering what will happen if an invalid MRN is used. And I know you'll be back, so.
Sorry, where did that answer were you?
We didn't get the answer to that. So what will happen if the invalid MRN, what will happen?
Yeah, in that instance, if it's a ro-ro movement, Deirdre, you wouldn't even be able to create a PBN.
Right, okay.
Right? Because you just immediately you'll get a response back from us to say it's not valid, and you wouldn't even get to create it, right?
Yeah.
If you're moving by air or Lolo, when the trader at exit would try to
do the 507, the arrival at exit message, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, they get a rejection.
They would get a rejection,
Yeah.
or if they use the ERVS, it wouldn't accept it. They'd get a rejection.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's my colleague Helen who
Hi,
assisted
Helen.
with that.
Thank you. That's great. So again, another example of an error. So what will happen if the incorrect offices of export and exit are included on the export declaration?
Well, I suppose I wouldn't worry too much about the office of export, because assuming that it would be a Northern or an NI office, right, that's fine, because that's up to HMRC's system to validate and to check, right? But if we don't get an Irish office of exit, then you can do a diversion, it's called. So say if you thought the goods were planned originally to go from Belfast directly out, right? But because of bad weather or because of whatever, the truck was diverted down and they came out of Dublin, you can do that 507 message, acts as a diversion, and it sends a request into the central system and says, is this MRN in here somewhere, and HMRC then would send us on the details and it would be diverted. So that's, it's causing delays because that's a manual process that has to be done, but it can be remedied.
Okay. We have 4 more questions, so I'm going to try and be really quick before we time out again. But so I know, again, the summary of this is the information, the data accuracy. The more you get better at it, the less mistakes that will happen, and the easier the goods will flow in very practical terms. So 2 questions here. First one, is there any new documentation required from the consignor or the exporter?
No. Nice simple answer. No. Now, that's because like your declaration is going into HMRC's export declaration system and not into ours. So there's nothing is changing on the Northern Ireland side.
We didn't get that one, Caroline. So any new documentation required?
No, there isn't. No.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question, where will HMRC carry out checks if required? Is that relevant to this, or?
No, it's wherever they currently do. I mean, if like, there are some checks now a bit more because of all of the sanctions. They're probably mainly documentary checks rather than physical. So, I mean, you're just sending in the supporting documents.
Okay, so we're down to the last 2 here, I think. So what would happen if all the MRNs are not included in the PBN where rural goods are leaving the EU from Ireland?
What that means then is that declaration is left, I can only describe it as it's open on the system, right? So the movement hasn't been closed out. Okay. And then there's legal obligations on but there's obligations then on HMRC then have to follow up. So there's inquiry proceedings between ourselves and HMRC. So it just means for the declarant, we'll be going back and saying, show us your proof of exit, and you'll have to provide all of that to us, and it'll all have to be done manually. So in other words, we'll be coming back bugging you after the event, whereas if you do it on time and you're being compliant, and it's creating less hassle for you subsequently.
Super. So final question then, it seems to be a fairly good question. If I have a Rolo truck with goods covered by an ATA carnet, do I create a PBN and be allowed to board the ferry leaving IE?
So Deirdre, yeah, you can create your own PBN using the ATA carnet ID, but for ATA carnets, they all need to call to customs. So they won't get a good to proceed to check in automatically. They need customs clearance first. So they'll all need to go to the Customs Office of Export.
Brilliant. That is great. I think that is all our questions, which is always a good sign. I know that we're going to share the recording of the webinar, and I hope Caroline's slides as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so if we wanted to get any more information online, if there are any links or anything like that, we'll also try and include them. Anything we have, we'll send it out to all the attendees. And look, thank you so much for coming along today to share this information with us. I'm sure that it will be very helpful for a lot of businesses here. It's always good to know about change and to be informed and almost to be ahead of it. So I hope that will really help. So thank you very much to the Revenue for coming along today. And also thank you very much because we've had quite a number of businesses who attended, and I know time is precious. It always is. So thank you as well for coming here today, and hopefully you got something from the webinar. And as always, we'll do our best to disseminate the information and try and keep you informed as well. So Orla as well from OMD Consultancy, thank you very much for all your help in organising the webinar. You always do a brilliant job, and thank you. So I suppose really without that, thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon, and thanks a million. Okay. Bye-bye.